Nick, why do you send me a random Discord server invite every time we're recording together?
I didn't. I do it on purpose. You know when you right click on someone and you go to mute and then you just sort of like move your mouse around? Okay, so right click my face and just move down that menu. It just pops up immediately. There's no delay. And then if you go to the right, it's easy to click on things accidentally in Discord. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Discord Crusade server cast.
If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on?
EJ, how many servers are you in?
I'm in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 servers. 3 of those are game-specific LFG servers. 2 of them are work-related.
Better than me. I'm in 23 servers.
That's too many servers.
It's true. I don't really hang out in many of them very often.
I mute everything.
Everything is muted. I'm in 12. Most of them are dead. The only one I check with any regularity is Nintendudes.
Nintendudes, the 10 guys of Nin.
I don't know. Yeah. Whatever. 10 guys
I
of
mute
Nin.
that one completely. I don't know anyone in that fucking server. It's like my 3 friends and then literally 100 strangers. And Max is like, why don't you just come hang out? I'm like, why would I randomly intrude on a fucking voice chat full of names I don't recognize? Your names change every fucking week. I don't know who anyone is.
That's fair.
Okay, oh, it's boomer. Marshall. You know Marshall. Oh, it's Steven. Who the fuck are those people? I don't know those people.
Yeah, this is the millennial struggle of trying to maintain friendships, but you don't want to be friends with your friends' friends, so then you just don't have friends anymore.
It's a video chat application for me, and then occasionally someone will hit some good memes in 10 Guys of Nin.
Yeah, I'm mostly here for the memes and for the Magic card spoilers and the video game news.
Yeah, Mark is red.
No role mentions. I don't want mentions. Don't give me an icon.
Yeah, it's funny that you use it just as a forum. Like
it's like Twitter, but you can actually read it chronologically.
Anyway, Console Crusade podcast.
We should put together an honest to God schedule of content and be like, all right, who's leading this one? Who's leading this one? Who's leading this one?
Well, like a chore wheel.
Yeah, it sounds like so much work.
It's called a release schedule. Which are 2 words I've never heard out of this podcast mouth since I've been a part of it.
Hey, it used to be released every Wednesday. I finally, just last month, changed it to releases Wednesdays.
I like that. That's funny.
Not a lie.
Technically correct, but this is the Console Crusade podcast.
Chris, you're so grown up now. Look at you stepping in, coming in, putting on daddy's pants. Wait.
Who's daddy? Yours? Mine?
I'll be your daddy.
We start over.
I tried. I was like, I'll lead these horses to water and see if they fucking take a sip. They didn't.
Listen, I have so much content now for the first 5 minutes of this podcast. I am not complaining. People like this. We talk shit. We ramble. We say funny. Well, Nick says funny things.
Console Crusade podcast. I am Chris Gillifor, joined by my good pals, as ever, EJ Olson and Nick Durheim.
Hey!
Howdy.
You're so official. This is professor voice.
A little bit, honest to God. And I've settled in. I had a good first week. I've got my feet under me now. I made two kids cry last Thursday and was like, nice. I'm not getting this full-time job.
Are you one of the teachers who comes in on the first day of class and you're like, 9 out of 12 of you won't pass this class?
Not even a tiny bit, not even a fucking little bit. And that's why I was just like gobsmacked. And really, like, one of them was upset and the other one was like sort of like adult bearing. They're gender non-conforming, so I don't want to say like mama or papa bear, but they were like adult bearing on their behalf and got kind of bent out of shape. And I was like, yeah, like I'm hearing you. Like, absolutely. Like, these are, what you're saying is super valid. I agree with it. Like, all of my part in it, and just watching them like rapidly de-escalate. You're like, oh, he's like listening to me. That's wild.
Sounds like theater kids.
A little bit.
100%.
Yeah, a little bit. And same student showed up at my office like 2 hours later and was like, hey. I'm like, hi. And they're like, how you doing? And I'm like, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm good. And yeah, we talked for like 15 minutes, had a great heart to heart, and we had a great class today with like a reset on the viewpoints work we were doing. But I was like, holy shit, it's week 1. Like, this could be really bad. And it wasn't. So I'm feeling great.
Yeah, that'll be the bell curve. You're gonna experience the most of that at the beginning, at the end of the semesters, probably.
Oh, I bet you're 100% correct. And with 4 classes worth of kids, like and they're all different. I have no overlapping students. So I just got a ton of students and like, it's going to happen. But no, I'm a really empathetic instructor. Like, I wouldn't give numbered grades if I could get away with it, but they won't let me. I just want folks to like get better at the stuff they're doing.
I had a teacher one time. She was a real hard ass. Like, she was a great teacher, but she was tough, and she was fair, but she did not take shit from anybody. And it was like, I'll give everyone a second chance, but there will be no third chances. And this is the problem with like high school and college kids, is like, it's just a bunch of people whose brains don't work properly, trying to figure life out. And sometimes, and I told this teacher this years later, 10 years later, she hired me for something, and we caught up. She told me the story of a student who like literally like tampered with her brake lines on her car, and there was like this whole like incident. It made the news. It was this whole thing. Like,
Kids do be like that.
kids are dumb, but like it gets spun as like student tries to murder teacher. It's this crazy thing. I know as a teacher, it's probably impossible not to take those things to be like, did I do this? What am I doing wrong that has caused this? You know, at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of people with brains that don't exactly work, misplacing their emotions and their problems because they can't function optimally in this world yet, you know?
Right. And that's just it is. And I've said this before to like other students when they're having emotional responses to like semester being hard, not specifically like anything I'm doing, because I'm a fucking teddy bear. Like, I'm there in service of them 100%. But I was like, you're not really responding to like this paper. You're responding to all of the like high school instructors and professors that you've had who are douchebags about people needing extensions because shit has come up in their life. And they're more concerned with like being the hard ass professor whose class is hard than being a human being who has also like experienced loss and experienced like physical impairment or like mental illness. Like they just don't care about that. And so they're responding to all of that like previous experience more than they're responding to what's actually happening in front of them. I think that was like kind of true here too.
You know what I have an emotional response to? Every Sunday night.
Oh, buddy.
How's that for a segue?
That's an A+ segue. That is an A+ segue. And I completely fucking agree.
Nick didn't like it. I saw the look on his face.
He shook his head, just that like really, really low key. Like, I've seen Annette make that head shake to me dozens of times in the basement of Gresham High School. Of like, Chris, what are you? Friends, listeners, all 3 of you, we friends and listeners combined, not 3 listeners. We have like 1 listener maybe. It's just Drew.
So
we are here to talk about, for the first time on the Console Crusade podcast, to my knowledge, a television show. And that is the HBO, dare I say, mega hit in the making adaptation of Naughty Dog's The Last of Us. EJ, you and I went toe-to-toe with regards to the second installment of this game. We had strong feelings about it, but we both played it. Both played both games. Nick, if memory serves, I don't think you played part 2. Did you play part 1?
I got about 8 hours into part 1, basically to the point where you meet the guy and his brother, and you're about to do like the nighttime leaving of the hotel.
All right. You put like a decent little.
So that's
chunk
like
in.
a third of the game, maybe a quarter, I'd guess.
No, 8 hours. I mean, you were over halfway in that game. I feel like. I'd have to look at a chapter breakdown.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know if you remember what season you were in. The game like pretty neatly divides. The first one pretty neatly divides into 4 seasons.
I don't think there was a season change yet.
No, that scans the first chunk of that game. I mean, as you know, like a lot of it is really it's all very cinematic, but a lot of it is very cinematic of like moving you into the exposition, the world building, giving you tutorials for the different systems. So
It's like a 15-hour game. Well, anyway, it's
neither here nor there. But you've dabbled. You are aware of this game and its impact on what gaming can do as a narrative medium, not just as one that is, I don't want to say entirely based on like video gamey things, but that a really, really well done narrative with really well done motion captured performances.
Yeah, I would say that's my main takeaway from Naughty Dog games in particular, is that it sort of set the high watermark for performance capture, and selling that as a feature to consumers to be like, hey, you want this. This is a thing that you like. I've heard people call Sony the HBO of video games, and that kind of tracks.
Yeah, wow.
Like that sort of level of prestige, whether you like it or not, that's like what they do. And I think that's their goal. So it makes sense for them to do a show with HBO, honestly.
It's weird to think that The Last of Us, the video game, is 10 years old this year. It's
wow.
And if you put that in context of like, if you go back to 2013 and you think of what games were 10 years old, dude, what a different world 03 to 13 was than 13 to 23 was. You know what I mean? And that's just, diminishing returns, on the quality of, not quality, from a content standpoint, but just technologically, like these leaps are getting smaller and smaller, and we're figuring out how to do things. It's like cinema. Like we kind of hit a point in like the late 90s with the advent of computers, and now it's just been sort of teeny tiny iterations, versus the previous, 30 years of filmmaking. But and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Nick, but we've talked at length about how like video games are not a good delivery method for a narrative like something in The Last of Us. Whereas a TV show, because Naughty Dog games are just movies that they put gameplay around. And I would argue that the second game did a much better job of weaving those two things, and the gameplay was much more of an integral part of that storytelling, whereas like the first Last of Us game is like, here's a gameplay area, here's 20 minutes of cutscenes, here's very much A, B, which some people love, maybe a little rote at this point, I don't know, but
it's kind of like how video games have kind of adopted storytelling from the get-go in a lot of ways. If you think about like classic RPGs and the advent of just having video in the first place, like think of Final Fantasy VII as being like the first like blockbuster AAA kind of video game with a story. Even before The Last of Us, you could think of video games that were kind of pushing into the acting and performance capture a little bit less, sophisticated, but like Grand Theft Auto, games like the even like Max Payne, I think, was sort of like going for that kind of action noir kind of style. But The Last of Us and even Uncharted were much more like genre flicks in their approach, which I think video games as genre flicks makes a lot of sense, because video games inherently are a much less complicated sort of medium as far as the depth of characters and the scope. Like you get a lot more scope in the world than you do the actual plot. I think video games, I've talked to you about this a lot, EJ, that video games are a really good way to do a setting, because you as a character, you as a player get to actually explore, and that becomes the integral sort of takeaway. Like Chris, obviously I could just appeal to you immediately by saying Metroid Prime and exploring Talon 4, and like that is the character, that's the main character of the game. You are Samus, you only see your reflection in the visor. Samus is not a character. She has no character, and that's the point, because you as the player are exploring the world, and that's the story that you want to take away.
Well, there's been a lot of talk this week after, 2 episodes of the show have been released now. There's been a lot of talk about how the video game adaptation curse like isn't real. Shut the fuck up. It's real.
It's real as fuck.
The overwhelming flops make up for whatever perceived successes. People talk about, like, when we talk cinema, Sonic and Detective Pikachu, like, whatever. Those movies are average as hell. Just because it's not Resident Evil 4 or whatever how many of those movies did they make?
Like 8.
You just look at the Halo show, and not only is it a bad adaptation, it's also not a good show. It's just, they're just compromises in all the wrong places.
Needless.
Right. A show like The Last of Us, or a game like The Last of Us, is so primed for adaptation because it is just a fucking TV show. You know what I mean?
You could super easily convince someone that The Last of Us video game is based on The Last of Us TV show, like in 20 years, and like nobody would bat an eye.
Let's jump into it. Like we're teasing it. We're teasing it. We're tickling the balls, but like we're
2 weeks in.
Yeah, let's talk about this. So I think at this point, like, to me, it's clear that, like, this is the one. And after the pilot, I felt pretty confident, like, this is the one. After this week and the things that they included in the second episode, which we'll talk about, I am sure that this is the one. You know, if it's gonna like break the curse, quote unquote. I don't know if I'd go like quite that far as you did with regards to like Sonic and Detective Pikachu, which I thought like hit the marks they needed to hit. That's not like, you know, the next great American piece of cinema, but they were very serviceable movies. And I think that they were serviceable movies in the same way that makes this show so outstanding as an adaptation of a video game, setting it apart from stuff in the past like the first Mortal Kombat film, or even the second, like the most recent Mortal Kombat film, which I had a great time with, but I still felt like suffered from a lot of the same flaws that, or the Street Fighter film, or the U-Ball Silent Hill films. Like, remember that era? Like U-Ball was just like,
oh man, Uwe Ball is hilarious.
just churning out video game adaptations that sucked. What they all had in common, at least to me, and you'll have to tell me if you agree with this or not, that The Last of Us does not have, and I am thankful for, in spite of some of the skull-achingly shitty takes on the internet to the contrary right now, which are thankfully in the minority, that those adaptations were trying to literally remake a video game in a cinematic standpoint instead of adapting the game into a cinematic standpoint, if that makes sense. So like in Mortal Kombat, we had to see all of the signature moves. We had to see like when Sub-Zero like jumps and does his kick. Oh my God, that's the move from the game. We had to see all the fucking signature moves. We had to see them fight in the arenas that would like change when you got smashed through the wall. We had to see all that stuff. And The Last of Us is not concerned with making a video game look like a video game on television. They're concerned with how do we translate what this story feels like? How do we translate what this story looks like? How do we translate what these people go through in a way that atmospherically makes sense in a TV show? And I have some like specific points of like evidence to this in the last couple episodes, the first two episodes I want to talk about. But first, I want to kick a tail here. Am I off base here? I feel like that's like a pretty fair assessment, like the state of the genre such as it is prior to now.
To be fair to a lot of bad video game adaptations, it's hard to adapt a video game because, like what Nick was saying, just the way you interface with the world and vice versa, why it's hard to tell a good story conventionally in a video game. It's because the two mediums are not necessarily compatible. And so adapting, you know, you say, why has there never been like a good Pokemon adaptation or something? And it's like, well, Detective Pikachu was not conventionally Pokemon in any way.
Right.
They built a new world, new concept, and just like put Pokemon in it and use those characters to service a completely original story. And that's why that worked.
Not a completely original story. Pokemon Detective Pikachu is a game on 3DS. I just wanted to lay that out. You know, like, I understand what you're saying, but
It's a very different feeling city now that I played some of
Right,
it,
yeah.
and I'm not finishing that piece of shit game. Just
that's a children's game. That's
it's awful.
So it's hard to not, I mean, even creatively, and we're seeing it with like The Witcher, when you have a team of people who disregard, I know they're basing things more off the books than the game, but they borrow things from the game, which is its own entity separate from the books. But when you don't have a team of people who understand the source material, and I don't just mean beat for beat, but like understand the themes and the motifs and the characters. And that's why Last of Us is so easily adapted, is because all those things that make great cinema, great television, all that's been done by like experienced directors and experienced actors. And so while on one hand it could be easy to, it's not a great one for one here, but like the live action quote unquote Lion King, where it's just like kind of a lifeless shot for shot remake of the cartoon. And it's just like, who was this for? Whereas The Last of Us, like, yeah, they're cheating off of the A+ student. So it's not that hard to also get the A+ in that sense. But like the way that they've been able to make it their own, take the aspects that really matter about the gameplay of The Last of Us and concentrate it into these little bite-sized moments where you still feel like everything about this freaking show And we'll talk about the casting and the characters, which I think we'll probably disagree on a little bit. But like for the most part, everything about the way the show looks and feels, the tension they're able to create. Dude, I'm having PTSD the first time I played this game. I'm like, these are feelings that I've only had playing The Last of Us. And I don't know if this is psychosomatic because like I'm expecting The Last of Us, but it so perfectly hits it that I'm just like, I don't like being back here because I hated playing those games, but this is such a unique feeling to those games, and they're capturing it. And even Sarah, she doesn't know anything about those games. Like we've been watching it together, and even she is just like edge of the seat. What's going to happen? And that's good TV. That they've already created these characters and expanded on them in ways that the game couldn't, and made it their own while also not being unfaithful to the source material. It's a balancing act. It's a dance. All right. And they're doing the freaking tango right now.
Yeah, the first episode gave Lindsay nightmares.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's fucking go.
She has a thing with like media with like chase scenes.
Yeah.
So
sure.
like that was a very tense, in the truck sort of beginning of that episode. And then she shared with me that apparently that first episode was originally going to be 2 episodes.
Yes.
But they combined them, which I think was probably the right call, because I think at this point I would be a little bit like, okay, when are we going to start getting some character development? Because that's been like my only sort of critique, I would say, is that so far it feels like Joel and Ellie, like your 2 principal leads, haven't really done anything that make them like likable characters. There's nothing to like hold on to. I think the supporting cast has been really strong, actually. Like I really loved Tess was fantastic. Tommy was absolutely wonderful, even though he was only in for like 6 minutes. And that's like my only thing. But as far as what you said, EJ, like A+ cheating and getting an A+, like that is exactly sort of what I was thinking. And like both of you talking about trying to make an adaptation, and like how do you capture what people like about the game? And with The Last of Us, it is cutscenes, it is the story, it is the people that you care about. And you don't really get a lot of that until the very end of the original Last of Us, as far as having a moment where it feels like you have the agency and it feels like you're making the choice, even though you don't actually make any choice. Like there is only one ending to that game. So it is really easy to have these characters and this like storytelling match up to the template, because the template is a TV show that you get to play. So it makes sense. And then just thinking about like Mortal Kombat, I think Mortal Kombat is funny because the games were sort of copying the sort of pastiche elements of a tournament movie, like a kung fu movie. It's cheesy, over the top kung fu action. So for the movie, the old like 90s movie, to do that as well makes a ton of sense. And that's why people look back on that movie and be like, yeah, that captures the essence of Mortal Kombat, because it is exactly what Mortal Kombat was trying to be in the first place. And you see failures with like Resident Evil, which don't capture the essence of the game and instead turn it into like whatever they turned it into. But it was still successful as a movie and as a series. Critically, not so, but like commercially, yes. Like I think that, and like the old Tomb Raider movies with what's her butt, like those
Angelina
were like,
Jolie. Yeah.
Angelina Jolie. Like those were some of the more like well known and commercially successful video game movies. And I don't know, I think TV shows makes the most sense for a long form medium like video games. I think we have such a long history of, I think the history of cinema is adopting from other forms of media. Like it's screenplays, like it's literally plays put to movies. It's books put to movies. So it's taken a while. It's taken like 30 years of video games being like what they are to get to this point. But since video games have kind of moved towards being more like TV shows that you play, it makes sense that a TV show from a video game would be like a natural fit. Like the God of War TV show is probably going to be absolutely wonderful as long as they have a good CG budget. But like, just think about it. Like that's already been announced. It's going to be great, right?
I've thought about this. I think because God of War is a little more fantastical, like you said, they have the right CG budget, maybe.
The clickers looked great in that last episode of Last of Us.
Oh, they look, yeah.
Oh, we'll get there. We will.
Yeah.
God of War is going to be terrific for sure. This is like, not to like epically take us on a tangent. I'm not a big fan of the cast the motion capture actor in the role when you do the adaptation, because to be totally honest, from like a theatrical standpoint, I don't have a fucking clue if you're good enough to carry this show. And I certainly don't know if you have the name recognition. You have to cast Chris Judge as Kratos. Like, that dude is the dude.
That would rule.
He is ready for it. He is big. He is stacked. He's got the fucking voice down. I will actually be pretty pissed off to the point of, unless you have someone I'm not actively considering because I'm so focused on Chris Judge that is a fucking ringer that I would not have pulled out of a hat, I don't even know if I'll watch the show if they don't cast him.
Casting Joel and Ellie is like not even in the same conversation as far as the difficulty casting as Kratos is. Like, casting Joel and Ellie, you could do that 100 times over and get it right probably 90 times.
Right.
Casting Kratos is such a different beast.
First of all, I think that, boy, I couldn't agree with you less on like the relative difficulty of casting those two roles. Like, I think that because of how much more nuanced and human, no pun intended, the performances in The Last of Us are, that they really had to get it right. And to be totally honest with you, when they announced that they had cast Pedro Pascal, I didn't think they got it right. I was like, this is a fucking mistake. Like, I did not see it at all.
Especially after Wonder Woman 1984.
Right. And it's like, oh, we're doing The Mandalorian with mushrooms now. Like, he literally had just come off of like 2 seasons of that show. And I'll out myself right now that I don't watch Game of Thrones. I've never watched Game of Thrones. I'm never going to watch Game of Thrones. And so I don't know his work on that show.
He was fine in Game of Thrones. It was not pivotal.
I was told Bella Ramsey was a ringer when she got cast. And I think that has borne out already for me in 2 episodes, outside of like the first part of the first episode where the really aggressive, like, fuck yous are flying like every couple lines. It's like, you're trying really hard for this. But now, like, the quippy slip the one-liners in that's so true to like Ellie early in the game, like, feels really right to me. And I also, I don't know. It fits for me. It makes sense for me.
Like, I appreciate a lot of what Pedro Pascal brings to the role. There are a lot of moments that are not in the game. And of course, most of what you see in the game is captured on set. It's performance capture. There's very little, at least if you can take everything at face value that you hear behind the scenes from guys like Neil Druckmann or any of the actors. You know, right now they're doing a behind the scenes podcast for this show, and there's a lot of good insight, both for the show and for the game in that process. But what you see in a video game motion captured is generally what the actor's giving you. And so you can, when you watch Pedro Pascal do things, you think that wasn't in the game. You know, Pedro Pascal is bringing something that they didn't think to bring. And that's not necessarily to compare the two, but it's just that any good actor is going to bring a little bit of their own flavor to a role. And like, there's this moment in the last episode, Joel is realizing that Tess is infected, and she says as much, and she takes a step towards him, and he flinches in response, right? It's fear, it's self-preservation. Also in that moment, coming to grips with the fact that this person that he has come to love and has lived with and made this life of hell with, like, he's saying goodbye to that in that moment. He's realizing, like, fuck. And just in that little movement right there, it was just like, that's fucking good.
It's a great moment. It's a fantastic moment.
That, and then just the beat, the timing of that realization happening, letting it sit, letting it simmer, and then him just grabbing Ellie's hand and being like, okay, well, we got to go.
There was no goodbye. There's, I do want to make a note. We are going to disagree on the casting, because I think I like Pedro Pascal, but he's a little one note for me, which works for like the sort of reserved, you know, a more meek character. There's some power under the surface there, but he's always right here. He's just kind of simmering. And so I'm like, yeah, Pedro Pascal kind of plays Pedro Pascal in everything I've seen him in. Yeah, okay. But that's Joel, so it works for me. Bella Ramsey, I'm like, you know, there are moments where she kind of makes me chuckle, and there are moments where I'm like, that's not it for me. And to me, it just seems like, oh, this is a really young actor who has not done a lot. And, you know, and she's capitalized on her Game of Thrones success, and it's work. You know, I think it's working. But I would not in a million years, like, probably ever choose her through 2 episodes anyway. We'll see how it shapes up. It's like serviceable. She's doing the story justice. I don't necessarily think she's doing the character justice. Yeah, but we haven't seen a lot yet, so it's hard to really judge that.
Yeah, Ellie through the first chunk of the game is I don't trust you and I'm funny. So like I'm laughing at like everything she said the last episode, like constantly like that was scary. This is a piece of wood. Like I'm on the couch like like making those little like one-off chuckles of like, nice, that was good. Like that was well delivered. That's like her whole function so far, as far as we've come.
And you do need that because you can't just have 60 minutes of tension. Obviously, you can't have that for a video game or a TV show. I think it's fallen a little flat for me, like her quipping and stuff, but it hasn't been like downright bad. I haven't disliked it, which I think is still a high watermark for this adaptation.
It's tough to not want to compare performances. There's a part of us who care for those characters that we've played these 2 games, and the performances from the original actors are awesome, So it is tough to not subconsciously or even let that kind of creep into your head while you're watching, like not comparing like, oh, who did that thing better, but just like you're always aware of that other person's performance, and at least I am, and so it can be a little distracting. But there are those moments where you just get lost in what's happening and you forget you're watching, like you forget that what's about to happen every scene, And so far it's been a very faithful 2 episodes. They've added some awesome stuff, which I'm sure we'll get to. But so far, beat for beat, I mean, we know what's right around the corner. But it's still like, oh my God, edge of my seat. Like,
keep in mind, like I haven't played this game in 10 years. Like I bought it. I bought the first game at launch because it was the hype was building. The hype wave was overwhelming at that point, and I got the last copy at the GameStop in McMinnville, and I fucking devoured it and was like, what is this? Like I hadn't been so taken by a new IP in like ever, honestly, maybe. So I don't really remember a lot of the first game. I remember the way it made me feel. I remember the atmosphere. I remember how tense it was. I remember the big plot beats. Like I remembered even like during this episode, like I remembered that Tess died, but I did not remember at all how she died. And that it was as similar as it was in the show, minus the like off-screen, unseen firefight portion as compared to what they did, which, we'll talk about. And so for that, as far as I'm concerned, like it's checked at the door for me, like the character performances. Like I'm not sitting there and holding it up and looking at it and going, okay, what are they doing? What did Ashley Johnson, is that her name? Ashley, what did she do with the role? I don't remember. I remember what she does in part 2, but even when the second season of the show comes out, whether that is next year or 2025, it's going to be as long as like half a decade since I played that game. So like even then, I'm not even going to have that big a frame of reference. And I don't want to do that to myself. Like I want to take what you're giving me in the moment. Are you telling me a lie? Are you trying to force this? Or are you just doing the thing as it's written down? And she's doing the thing for me right now so far, Bella Ramsey. She's doing what's been put in front of her so far.
I have a much fresher relationship with those games. So yeah, maybe that is just my problem. At least, none of us are sitting here like we saw in that Kotaku article today, crying about how there was no, stealth missions and bomb crafting.
Not yet. There's going to be like a montage where like they get in a sticky wicket and they've got to do some impromptu sort of IED shit.
There will be a homemade
probably
explosive.
The next episode, honestly. There's going to be next episode.
There's going to be a moment where he like grabs a rusty ass pair of scissors and like electrical tapes it to his stick and shivs a clicker with it. Like it's going to happen, but it's going to be quick. And I think that this like...
And it'll be earned.
It will be earned.
2 episodes.
It will be earned. And it speaks to like this whole, like I said, some of the like smooth brained takes on the internet where it's like, this, like on Kotaku specifically, which I told you guys in chat, but like I'm fucking done with this website after the coverage of this show. I'm like, we've literally waited our entire lives for a video game property to be adapted and to be really fucking good. Not to be serviceable like Sonic and Sonic 2 and Detective Pikachu, but be really fucking good. And you guys are seriously like, oh, it'd be great if it was more like the game in terms of having to like craft shit. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
I really missed the part of the show where Joel moves a trash can so that he can climb up to the ladder.
no, but that is literally in the first paragraph. And EJ, you said the same thing. You were like, is this parody? I was like, I don't know, until I got halfway through and went, oh my God, this is
It's not
real
satire.
take.
It's legit.
This is a real fucking take and a real article. They have captured what that feels like. And that is so much more important to me. Like the clicker section in the second episode.
Ooh.
That is what a clicker encounter feels like in The Last of Us, where you are desperately trying not to fuck up. You are desperately trying to move quietly. You are desperately trying, and you screw it up, and it goes sideways, and you're dumping lead into these things, and they're not dropping. And then the reloading of the gun, I was like, this is a beautiful nod to what that game felt like, where you're like, everything takes a long time, because it really would take a long time to craft a shiv, to make a bomb, to reload a pistol, when an echolocation split-headed fungus monster is trying to cut you to pieces and like sliding all of the shells out, trying to be quiet, knowing those things are fucking hot because they just got emptied, and having to be quiet, slide them in the pocket, reload the other ones. And what? This is it. This is what it felt like. And that to me is the biggest reason of why it's been so successful so far, in spite of like really good performances, incredible world design that's like true to the games while deviating, which we should probably talk about, the spores thing.
I'm going to beat this horse, but like adapting anything, adapting a book into a movie, you're not adapting a 1,000-page book into a 1,000-page script. And that's where adaptations go wrong, is they, like I said earlier, they compromise because they're trying to be the video game and the TV show. You can't do that. This has to be 100% balls to the wall, a TV show. And to be fair, there are a lot more exquisitely crafted television shows than there are video games. And so like what you're describing, that moment in that whole scene where they're trying to get through the library, like there's nothing about that I haven't necessarily seen before. I think it's more of a testament to like the game, how they're able to communicate those things in like such a concise package and something that feels cinematic. And I don't literally mean the cutscenes, but like, you know what I mean? And that's part 2 was like really good at this. So it's more a testament to like how well that game was developed for what it was at the time. This show is not making those compromises. It is saying, who are these characters at their core? What is the story at its core? And the story at its core, as we know, it's this father-daughter story. It's about love and how scary love can be, as we know from The Last of Us ending. And that's what that's what every episode of the show is really going to be about, is like seeing people make decisions based on their emotions when the only choices in front of you are shitty. That's all that matters.
And they already lampshaded it with Ellie talking about not knowing how to swim. There's going to be probably a payoff to that, but it won't be a fucking gameplay defining feature throughout your 16-hour adventure.
Right. And I love the fact that I literally was like, I recoiled a tiny bit when she's like, I can't swim. I went, oh my God, he's going to go get the wood pallet.
And then Pedro just is like, no, this is 3 feet of water.
We're going to see the wood pallet in episode 2. And they were like, nope. They knew we were going to think that. And they were like, that's not what we're doing here. That's not what we're doing here. That's a character building moment of fucking idiot. Like you didn't even see how deep it was to help establish relationship.
And EJ, I have to push back a little bit. Earlier, you were saying that you weren't really feeling Pedro Pascal's performance, and not that I'm like in love with his performance so far, but I think of the 2 main characters, he's had so much more as far as what you mentioned as the primary thesis of the series and the video game being about love and how scary that is. The scene with him and the guard outside after they had just escaped, like that immediately like gives you something to root for Joel. Like I haven't like felt that so far, but that moment was like a really good, redeeming moment. It's a moment that you want Joel to kick this guy's ass because he is protecting the now surrogate daughter figure that you project because you saw him lose his biological daughter. And you don't need them to get along with each other yet because you are shipping them as a father-daughter sort of pair. And so far it's been a little bit weak as far as Ellie's character because she does not have a character yet. She is just a wisecracking teenager. She doesn't have a
She's cargo.
goal. She's cargo. She is not even a person. She she doesn't have who is she? What does she want?
Right.
You don't know that yet. So that's why it's the first 2 episodes have been weak for that character so far.
And they've seeded the garden really well in terms of incorporating the DLC from the first game. That it's clear that the mall she's referencing is the DLC, that she was there with someone else. The reference to no family, no boyfriend. She's like, I'm an orphan and no. That I was sort of
yeah,
they're doing a great job. The garden has been seeded for sure. And Pedro absolutely killed the first half of that first episode. That for me was gonna not make or break the series by any means, but make or break my estimation of are you up to this role? And he fucking crushed it. Everything about that first scene. And again, they're literally doing the prologue of the game, which is largely cinematic and they lead you through. But holy shit, he went there. He went there in a believable and gut-wrenching way. And that is the buy-in to Joel.
He sold the character of a dad who's not the greatest, but is trying. And that is his greatest regret, is that he wasn't better. And that is his character. That is who he is for the rest of the game and the TV show, probably, is looking for redemption.
Right. That's just a well-written character. But basically in between the 2 big emotional moments, he's just the Mandalorian. He just voice effect Joel.
That's not his fault though.
No, I know it's Joel's character. Anyway, I don't want to get into the comparison between the 2 actors because that's only going to serve to hurt my experience with the show.
Really quick, I just want to say that I like that they are playing it as a very not Southern twang Joel. I think Troy Baker's sort of Southern voice is kind of cartoony and cringe, and I think it would not last in a full-blown HBO show.
Sure.
Not at all. And Pedro was literally raised in Texas. He grew up there. He knows what a Texas accent sounds like. He's doing a terrific job with it.
Right.
Let's talk about some of not only the changes, because there have been a few changes, like you brought up the spores, Chris, but there's also been obviously 2 massive openers that have expanded on
super tight
on things that we've seen and things that we have not seen, but that add to the world.
Or red, newspaper kind of clipping stuff, very, very, non-important sort of side stuff.
Nick, you said about how that was originally supposed to be episodes 1 and 2, and it was pretty late in the game that they decided to combine everything after I think it's when Joel dumps the little boy's body in the fire.
Yep.
Was that going to be at the end of episode 1? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was going to be, if it would just cut to the QZ and that would be, next time on The Last of Us, or that makes sense. Tempo wise, pacing.
I think combining those, what was 2 episodes into 1 was a good choice because, well, we had to have Joel meet Ellie. Those are the characters, right? That's who the show is about. And everything with Sarah at the beginning of the show is only there to basically set Joel's character up and inform the relationship with Ellie that we're going to see a few episodes from now develop. So even the idea that even a few months before they wrapped post-production that this was still split episodes. I mean, yeah, whoever made that call, that was great. I cannot imagine, especially for a new viewer, to be okay, we spent all this time with this character, now she's dead, and then you end on Joel just fucking no emotion, just tossing a kid's body into the fire, and you're just kind of
broken man.
Why do I want to watch the next episode of this fucking show?
And that was exactly the studio's rationale, is that they're I don't think we want to leave people on this note, which I think is smart. I think more significantly, what came out as a side result is exactly what you said, EJ, that we get to the core of the show at the end of the first episode. And for a 12-episode show, you need to get to the fucking point. You need to get to the point. And I think the proof is in the pudding. I sent y'all this in chat, but the episode 1 to episode 2 boost in viewers, it was a 22% increase from episode 1 to episode 2, which is the biggest in the history of HBO.
And now this is why companies are no longer doing the binge format. They're back to the weekly schedule, even if it's direct to stream, because the interest that gets generated by the recap culture, the blogs, the YouTubes, the TikToks,
Yes.
that is what they want to see.
It's a whole cycle. There's like 4 dedicated, like major podcasts that are doing a weekly Last of Us episode now.
Yeah, FOMO, baby.
The guys at The Ringer are doing it every single week. I love the watch. Like,
Those fucking guys at the console Crusade, they're doing it now. You know, it's just hackneyed bastards.
it's a whole thing. But you're exactly right. And like I said, the frickin' proof is in the pudding. And I felt this way after Andor too, which I have to just like briefly mention here in terms of like the year that we're having right now in not only getting what is undoubtedly going to be the best adaptation of a video game to the screen in any capacity of all time, but we also just got like maybe the best Star Wars property ever that like no one thought was going to be good, and also utilize the weekly format in a way that I don't think I'd necessarily seen before, with these like 3 episode arcs of shows that you'd come in and you would know that we were heading for something. And then when you got into something, you would know, oh, we're going to be moving into like the middle installment of this on the way to setting up the climactic finish. And literally they just got better every single time. So like, what a time to be alive for fucking nerds. I can't believe every single time I got to the end of an episode of Andor, I would be like in tears almost, just going, I can't believe this is finally happening, like an adult Star Wars show. And The Last of Us has already been the same. We're just like, I can't believe this is finally happening. Like, I've waited for this for so long.
As far as quality of storytelling, the way the show is paced, Andor is without a doubt the best Star Wars thing that's ever existed, period. I mean, as a Star Wars property, like there are better things because Star Wars is such an interesting thing. But same goes for this. We're only 2 episodes in. I would be shocked if they did anything to derail itself. Like this will be, you know, the greatest adaptation of a video game. But even beyond that, like that's not even saying that much. But like this is probably going to be one of the best adaptations of anything.
Period. And it's going to be maybe the best show that's on television this year, period. And like all of those things being true about the same thing at the same time that happens to be a video game turned HBO limited series. Like, I can't believe
It's cool to be this confident in a TV show this early. It's sometimes TV shows take a little bit to be like, yeah, this is going to be worth watching. And I think something in common with all the greatest TV shows is that it's immediately enthralling. Like from the first episode, from the first 10 minutes, like it has to have that. And I think something that was really an interesting choice, EJ, you mentioned this earlier, but the intro being a like period piece talk show sort of segment, totally like irrelevant to the story as far as like the characters, but just setting up like this sort of science fiction alternate history of the fungus and just like them hammering home like, no, there is no cure. This is not something that we can science our way out of. Like if this happens, then we're fucked. And they did the same thing with the opening of the second episode where it's like a different country. Was it Argentina or was it? No, it was
Indonesia.
Island. It was Indonesia. Yeah, it was Jakarta. And they're like, that was just such a nice little miniature vignette of a realization of the seriousness and the impact that this, what is just a zombie story, and turning it more personal and like reflecting on governments and how they react to things. It reminds me, because I am also a turbo nerd, of Shin Godzilla and its commentary on government reactions to natural disasters. Like it was fully a, hey, what is the red tape and how do governments respond to crises and how does that trickle down and affect you and me? And obviously everyone had a firsthand reaction to what government's decisions end up reacting and how that worked out 2 years ago when the pandemic started. But I think it's easy to sort of fall on The Last of Us's fungal outbreak as a COVID stand-in, but I don't think they've really sort of hammered that yet. I haven't felt that. It's mostly just been like check it out, the government sucks and the army are bastards because they killed Joel's daughter.
Right.
So the first episode opens up. It's like the 1960s, and it's this. What do they have? They have two guys on. Is one of them an epidemiologist?
There's a mycologist, an epidemiologist and a mycologist.
Yeah. And they talk about the idea of a pandemic, and the one guy says, I'm way more worried about fungus, and he lists all these different types of fungus, and he says, right now, the human body is not a climate that a fungus can live in on that level, but give the fungus a reason to evolve. Say the Earth gets a few degrees warmer, and that's what was always so cool about The Last of Us was they were very intentional to always make it feel like this was rooted in reality. It wasn't just another zombie flick with some brush to the side explanation for why this is happening. They went out of their way to make it feel as grounded as possible, and not just what you get on the surface in the cutscenes in the narrative, but everything you discover, the audio logs and the notes, and the show is just taking that to the next level. And obviously, like you said, Nick, there's a little bit of they could have been a lot more ham-fisted with the wink wink pandemic, don't you get it, because of the last 3 years of bullshit that the world has gone through, but
they showed the tiniest modicum of restraint, and for that I applaud them.
Yes, it's just enough. Just enough.
And let's talk about it, because this is the biggest, to me, change that they've made, and that is, how does this thing spread? I think that it is no accident that they moved it away from airborne spores, as it was in the game, that requires frequent wearing of face masks.
Yeah.
There's no fucking way that show was going to get made, even on HBO, because they knew it was going to piss too many people
Oh,
off.
I disagree. I don't think there was any social reason why they didn't do that. I think
I want to live in the world that you live in mentally, because I think that's a generous take. I think it's crystal fucking clear to me that that's why they switched it up, because it makes this whole it has to be distributed orally basically thing. It doesn't make a goddamn lick of sense to me to how fungus and spores work. And I get that Craig Mazin was talking about, the creator, the showrunner was talking about that would mean it would just be everywhere and not in only isolated areas. I'm well, kind of, but it's a big fucking world, and it's not going to be just literally in the air everywhere. It made sense of the game to me.
COVID would disagree.
But a fungal spore is not an airborne virus. They are very different.
They function the same.
It feels like that's why they did it. But in any case, they moved away from that. It is not a spore. There will be no wearing of gas masks, as often we saw in the game when you're moving through cramped locations with a lot of spores in the air.
I agree with EJ that it was probably more a pragmatic answer to it's hard to act through a mask.
That's the biggest one. But also logically, that's the one of the bigger suspension of disbelief you have to have is where they're fine walking through this hotel and they're wait, spores, put your gas mask on. And it's okay, if this were real life and it were that loosey-goosey, everybody would have it.
I'm sure there will be exceptions where there will be a certain concentration of spores that will manage to get through with a special infected, because there's going to be, they already alluded to that, it's obvious. They set the breadcrumbs. When the clickers showed up, even Lindsay was oh, they've already got a special infected, because she's played Left 4 Dead, but she hadn't played, The Last of Us. So it's it's obvious that there's going to be archetypes and different variations and evolutions of these forms of people. Joel even saying sometimes they last for a couple months, sometimes they've been living for 20 plus years. And I think it's really cool that they moved it away from the spores and these being individual sort of beings, and it's more of a literal fungal network.
The hive mind.
Hive mind. And that was a really cool moment where it's oh, I shot that guy, and there's this the tendrils, and now everybody knows you've alerted the witch.
It's so much scarier that way when you see them all writhing, and it's just the wave formation back and forth as they're writhing on the ground when they're way up high looking. Dude, that is terrifying. What a cool concept.
That's a great piece of adaptation where it's okay, so in
For
the
sure.
game, they flock towards humans just if they happen to hear them, I guess, or maybe smell them, ? It's never super clear, but because it's a video game is the real answer. That's why they're flocking towards you, because that creates challenge. they created an in-world reason that makes a ton of sense. That it's a fungal network. They are a part of that fungal network. If you step on a piece of the fungus that is still living and it's connected to a bunch of infected, they're going to come in that direction because it means food. It means hosts. Something that more intelligent people than I am noticed in the first episode. In the second episode, we get a reference to, oh, these people who are infected were working at a grain and flour factory. And
a perfect substrate.
Perfect substrate. Second episode framing, like I said, we're in Indonesia. A professor of mycology at the University of Jakarta is examining a recently dead infected that still has like living tendrils that's still growing inside them. Really gross shit, like really gross, but very fascinating, like body horror shit. In the first episode, we see a whole bunch of, apparently, again, I'm not smart enough to have noticed this, a whole bunch of instances of the main characters almost consuming flour-based products and not consuming them. So like Sarah's like, I'm so sorry, I was going to make you pancakes for your birthday, but she can't because she had to get the money to go fix the watch. And then there's extra biscuits left over at the neighbors, but they don't want to eat them because the neighbors are weird and they don't really like want that connection, but they kind of have to have it because it's the South and that's what you do with your neighbors, but they don't eat them. And then cookies that the neighbor makes, which we see later from grandma, are like clearly carrying like the fungus. They don't eat those either. They set them aside. And so it's like right there, baked into the first episode in some like really impressively subtle ways. Baked in. I didn't mean to do that. In impressively subtle ways. And the way that we see it working on grandma, who has dementia, I think is like perhaps the most like interesting and subtle piece of world building of all of them, because we know that in order for this thing to survive, it has to like operate a functional central nervous system to like pilot the flesh puppet, so to speak. Grandma's got dementia. And so it takes so long.
She's a very weakened host.
Exactly. It literally is repairing her brain. And when we see her like moving around in the chair, it's literally going like, oh, we've got some motor control again. I'm like, that's fucking crazy to me. Like, that's brilliant.
There's something scary about a fuzzy grandma, just an out of focus grandma who's twitching around.
There's so much they could do to like take this show to 11, but they don't fucking need to. Like that moment right there, like you see the first time someone turns, it is this grandma just subtly twitching and contorting in the chair and then going limp again. And it's out of focus. And some people probably didn't even notice that that was happening, you know? And instead of this flashy, horrifying, and then later when Sarah goes into the house and instead of like seeing this horrific, you know, this zombie flying around and hearing these grotesque noises, it's the dog. And we know what that dog is telling us. And we know don't go into that fucking house because we saw grandma earlier. And Sarah goes into the house. Well, she sees the blood.
Yeah.
And she falls in.
Yeah.
She sees the guy and he's using his eyes to look at basically say, no.
Get out.
It's just everything is so subtle. I really do want to talk about how much they expanded on Sarah's role. And I mean, we alluded to it, but when I saw how deep they were going on that, I was kind of concerned. I was like, you guys are pulling a fucking Bobby B on me. Oh, you don't know what that means because you haven't seen Game of Thrones. You guys are pulling a fucking Ned Stark on me. You get me all invested in this character just to kill him off right away.
That one I know. Because I read the first book. No, we should absolutely talk about expansions of side characters, because I think we talked about main characters to death. We've talked about like some of the major changes, notably the spores, but I think that we should talk about Sarah. We should talk about Tess. Those are pretty much the only side characters so far.
Marlene a little bit, who is played by the performance capture actress.
Isn't that great?
And she is not, however, the only actor reprising their role for the show.
Oh, really? That's cool.
They hired the same people who voiced the clickers to play the fucking clickers, and I thought that was chef's kiss. Since we're on the subject of the prologue, Sarah has a lot more going on in the first episode of this show than she did in the game, and I'm curious about like how that sat with y'all.
I think it worked. They definitely needed to have Sarah be more of a character in order for her death to matter. Like, it mattered more because in the game you actually physically control her for the majority of the proportion of that prologue. And it was only until she breaks her ankle that you start controlling Joel. So you have that natural sort of like, I'm not gonna, talk shit about The Last of Us and say it's only cutscenes with like gameplay sprinkled in. Like, that's not actually what I feel. I think it does actually help a lot when you get to play as these characters. It's just, different importance. But having you play as Sarah makes it a scarier experience because you're a young girl, so you're a more, fragile being, and that gets you in the moment of the outbreak day actually, being scary and you being invested and caring about the outcome of this person's life. But in a TV show, you have to give it a little bit more time. You have to make this character likable. And I think they accomplished that by having extended scenes, like actually showing her going to the shop and getting the watch repaired and having that sort of not only tying into her character and her like being a good daughter and caring about her dad, but also having that moment of like things are getting out of control. People are starting to panic, and you get that perspective of like a teenager or a young girl who does not really see that and like worry. It's just sort of like, oh, things are going on. You hear police sirens. Things are weird, but it's not like scary yet. But as a watcher, you're like, no, things are getting weird. You need to get out of there. Like, alarm bells are going off in your head, seeing someone not react to alarm bells going off around them.
This is just a hallmark of good filmmaking. And it's something that they did really well here to like, yeah, anyone who plays the game, you're watching this and you're like, well, none of this happened. And maybe that turns some people off. And you also have to think of it from the perspective of someone who's never seen this before. But none of it really matters if you're just doing it well, right? And so good filmmaking is layers. Like you said, on the surface, we're getting to know this character, she's doing this thing. But you're getting the subtext of like everything going on around that the characters aren't necessarily noticing. But we know where the show is going. We are getting to know a character. Of course, we know she's going to die. But it's important to get to know her. Even though she really is, her character is just a tool to set up Joel's character. Like I said earlier, it's a ladder. If you don't care about her, then you don't care when she dies, and you don't care what she meant to Joel, which means everything else we're going to see with Joel and Ellie, you don't give a shit about. So in these few scenes, we're world building, we're setting up the immediate conflict, and you're setting up this character. And it's doing all of those things well simultaneously. I'm doing Trump hands right now. So many shows and movies don't understand that. And it's like you get jerked around between like, well, now this scene is doing this thing and this scene is doing this. A good filmmaker makes all of his scenes do all the things they need to do. There's no wasted real estate. There's no wasted screen time. And I know there's a lot of angry incels on the internet, Neil Cuckman and all this. And obviously he can like direct people and he can direct media in a cinematic way. Like he's got two extremely successful games that prove that. He did this episode, but just having him co-producing with a team of people and another producer who like does TV, that's how the adaptation's like never gonna not be faithful, because this is Neil Druckmann's baby. So that with his level of involvement, like he's not gonna betray his own, which that's a controversial thing to say. Neil Druckmann won't betray his art. But, apparently killing Joel in The Last of Us 2, spoiler alert, was betraying his art. I think that's a fucking ridiculous take. But
I don't think it's impossible to be skeptical, or to say it's not unfounded to be skeptical of even Neil Druckmann being involved, because George R.R. Martin was also involved with a lot of the Game of Thrones TV show, and that still ended up going off the rails. And not even in the final season, not in the final 2 seasons, but it was like a pretty steady decline into mediocrity. And that takes time, obviously. And like, I'm not saying that it's going to be, 2 episodes and like 7 bad ones. Like, I don't think that's going to happen here, but it's understandable to an extent to be like, okay, but show me.
Sure.
Like, don't just talk it up. Don't say, oh yeah, anything that we did in the show that wasn't in the game is additive because it's stuff that we wanted to do, but we just couldn't because it was a game made in 2013. Like, talk is cheap. Show me. And I think they've shown.
They have shown.
I think they've shown that they're doing it right.
It would be really easy to sit here without any episodes having been released and like make our predictions based on.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have to understand, like, Neil Druckmann is not consulting from his bungalow in Massachusetts or whatever and ghostwriting an episode once a season. You know what I mean? Like, George R.R. Martin's involvement in Game of Thrones is much less than what we're seeing here with Neil Druckmann. I get your point. I do. But it's just understanding what those roles are. And that's not to say, like, it could be the opposite. You could have too much control. Like, you could go George Lucas with it. George Lucas loved Star Wars. It didn't help him make anything good after 1980 or 83 if you're a millennial, but whatever. Ewoks.
Absolutely, 100%. The fact that he's a co-producer on this is not insignificant, but it's that co-piece that I think is so critical. And the fact that, so when they said, okay, Craig Mazin is going to be the co-showrunner, it's going to be all the Chernobyl people, I was like, okay, here's another show that I probably should have watched, and I didn't, because I don't ever watch anything on time, because that's how I do, except for films of late, but when television, never, ever on time.
TV's so time consuming.
It is, and I just, like, frankly haven't had time for that. It's either like, I either like stop going to the gym, which at this point is going to happen, or I stop playing video games, which isn't going to happen. And so it's just a balancing act. I have to be pretty fucking selective. There's just only so many hours in a day, and I like to spend a lot of them with my spouse not being in the house in front of the television. It is what it is. So I went back and I watched the first episode of Chernobyl. I was like, I want to know the kind of hands that I'm in. And I was like, this is going to be it. This is going to be it. And to my shame, I have not finished the show. I watched the first episode. I was enraptured. I was also in graduate school. So the first episode came and I went, that's amazing. And I never watched another one. But the way that they unspool information while simultaneously like putting you in the middle of the shit, that is The Last of Us, where you only have a little bit to kind of move you from A to B. A whole bunch of shit is going on in the meanwhile. It's claustrophobic. It's atmospheric. It's you feel trapped, like watching the guys like crawl around the reactor while it's going tits up. In the first episode of the show, it's like this is it. This is what it feels like to play The Last of Us. I think that if Druckmann had, and I don't know why anyone would have bankrolled this, but if he had been like the solo producer, like if he had been the showrunner, I think it would have been a worse show.
Probably.
Because he's too close to it. Because he's too close to it. And it's the same reason why I feel like directors shouldn't get to make their own memory films, which is like a weirdly specific tangent, but like, what was it called? Belfast last year? Total fucking snooze fest. Because Kenneth Branagh is too close to the source material. The Fabelmans this year, horrid movie. Absolutely the most average film I've ever seen. And it's got 1 million Oscar nominations because it's fucking Steven Spielberg. It is the definition of mid cinema because he's too close to it. There's no plot. There's no story. It meanders. The performances from its lead characters are not good. They're creating facsimiles of these people. That is what would have happened if Neil Druckmann had produced The Last of Us by himself. Honest to God.
Likely, yeah.
So getting this outside eyes who have done like a calamitous kind of like post-apocalyptic nostalgia thing in Chernobyl. I don't even know how to define it. It's such like a weirdly specific product. I was like, these are the guys. And that is the influence that is keeping this on track while allowing Neil to be like, I know what the heart of this story is. I know what this world is. But you can help me make this in a way that will be truer to television without my own like horse blinders interfering.
Chernobyl wasn't like totally for me. I actually can't remember if we finished it. That was a couple years ago. That was the summer I got my TBI. So rough summer. Don't remember a lot of that summer, but that was 2019, right? That was the year the Raptors won the championship. That summer, that was when Chernobyl was out, right?
I think it was 2020.
I don't remember. It's one
I
of those.
I want to say it was like early. It was like late 2019, early 2020. Because I remember people watching it or like not watching it because the pandemic was starting and being like, okay, this is like too fucking stressful to be dealing with like right now.
Yeah, May 2019. Okay, yeah. So it was like NBA playoffs.
Really? Okay.
Anyway, weird time. So I don't remember if we even finished it. But the thing, like you brought up, Chris, like there is a lot less content to pull from when you're looking at how do we make the nuclear power plant melting down? Like, how do we make that? And obviously it was like the trial. Like, there was a lot more to it than just like the disaster. How do you turn that into several episodes of compelling television? Like thing goes boom, everybody dies or gets like fucked up.
And they did, and it won a bajillion Emmys.
Right.
It was like the hit of that year.
So it's in a way, it's like kind of the perfect guy and the perfect team to like extract the nuggets of gold from a video game and expand on that in like a meaningful way. That's as good a track record as you could probably have in like modern television of like building something compelling with not a lot of source material. But that's also two shows to me. It's like The Disaster and then The Trial. It's like two separate things. But the way they did it, yeah, it's compelling. And anytime you can take something like that and make it like appeal to normies, that's a tough thing to do. So
Craig Mazin, writer for the Hangover trilogy, now showrunner of Chernobyl, now showrunner of The Last of Us adaptation. What a weird trajectory that is. Side tangent before I forget it. I think Neil Druckmann working with someone who did Chernobyl and now they're both doing The Last of Us is going to make The Last of Us 3 a pretty good game.
Oh, absolutely. You're nuts if you think that's not going to rub off. Like, it absolutely is going to be influencing him. And I'll bet you $1 to a dozen donuts right now, because we know part 3 is in development. It got like weirdly no press when he announced it. I don't even remember like the event in which he announced it. It was like, hey, we're working on it. Surprise to no one. I think they're going to release season 3 of this show day and date with part 3 of the game releasing.
that's crazy. That's an insane take. That's an insane prediction. There's no way.
I think they will.
There's no way.
I think the season will end when the third game is going to be like coming out soon.
I mean, season 2's coming out in like a year or 2 years at most.
Season 2 would probably be 25, and then season 3 would probably be 26.
You think part 3 is not going to be done in 2 years?
The game or the show?
Yes, the game. Because they could be writing the treatment in real time while they're working on the game.
I think the game will come out in 25 or 26.
26 probably the earliest.
Because part 2 came out in 2020, so like 6 years with like a little side
7
project
years.
multiplayer
Yeah.
game.
and that's a long time.
Feels right.
A long fucking time to wait for the third season of television. I got a feeling that they're gonna be like, y'all can get the game, get ahead of the pilot, maybe like a month in advance. I don't know. I think it's going to be close. I think that it's going to be close.
Yeah, they'll try to time it out, but it's going to be wiggle room, and games get delayed in the final hour all the time.
The game will have to come first. There's just no incentive to release them simultaneously or even close to simultaneously. It can only serve to hurt the other property, whether from a perception standpoint or just a sheer numbers game.
But it's like a foregone conclusion that they're going to do a third Last of Us game, and there's going to be 2 more seasons of the Last of Us TV show that follows the events of part 2.
They said they're doing both
nothing's been
games,
greenlit yet.
12 episode. Well, okay, but like Craig has talked about, we're doing the fucking second. He's like, we're doing 2 12 episode seasons. Like, it's fucking gonna happen. And I love that. That's another like the Chernobyl thing of his influence is that this could really easily have been like, let's make like 6 seasons out of these 2 games. And they probably could have. It would be worse, but they probably could have. And they're making no bones about the fact they're like, nope, we're telling this concisely. We are not milking this. We are not beating this dead horse. We're getting in, we're getting out.
Yeah, and that's just like an understanding of like, again, good filmmakers. Like, they see the story content of the game and they say, oh, that's about 10 hours. Like, yeah, we could stretch that to 12 hours. Stretching it to 24 hours, insanity. Or stretching it to 16 hours and doing 2 8 episodes, that's insane. And they just, as being a good filmmaker, you know that. You don't even need to like inspect it very thoroughly to know that.
And lesser TV shows have done so to great success with like The Walking Dead. Like, you can easily indefinitely extend a TV show as long as people are still watching.
A numbers game. People were still watching that show. It hasn't been good in 7 years.
People are still watching. Have you looked at the numbers?
They canceled it for a reason.
I mean, they ended it eventually because, yeah, exactly.
They were barely
they could have done
pulling
that.
3 million viewers. They literally lost like half their viewership in the second season when they killed Glenn. Like literally half.
Whoa, spoilers.
I mean, that show, oh, shut the fuck up. That show's been on life support for years.
I agree.
And I'm just saying that there's still a market that wants a big budget feeling zombie show, which I think The Last of Us fills that niche to a mainstream audience. And then to the, 100,000 people that cross over from the TV show from the game, like, it's a rousing success.
Oh, sales of the game have gone up like 400% in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, but that means nothing without knowing how much it was selling before the show came out. Like, that doesn't matter to me. Show me on NPD next month where it ranks, and that will actually impress me.
Look, the fact that it has boosted sales like 4.5 times over,
Which was inevitable. We saw that with Cyberpunk. We saw that with The Witcher. I mean, we knew that was going to happen. That was a foregone conclusion. If it didn't happen, that'd be news.
this game is 10 years old.
With a remake that came out last year.
6 months ago.
Which, for the record, my buddy just had his first Last of Us experience. He wanted to finish it before the show started coming out, and he played the PlayStation 5, the remastered version, and has like gone back and looked at part 1 has gone back and looked at like the comparison videos, and like it's shocking, if for no other reason that like the increase in the degree of like nuance in the motion captured performances of the people is fucking staggering to me. How much better it is now, which makes me so fucking excited for part 3.
It's great that they kept all that raw data so that they could improve it later. You know, maybe in 2 years we'll get a DLC skin pack for Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey to replace
mods incoming, dude. Day 1 on Steam in March,
models.
bro.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's gonna happen probably.
Do you think this is an interesting question? Do you think that are they gonna like Harry Potter cover art part 3 where they're going to start like looking more like those people? You know what I mean? Like Harry Potter on the cover of the Deathly Hallows is like clearly Daniel Radcliffe, and he looks nothing like him in the first 3 books.
Here's the thing. No matter how successful this show is, at the end of the day, it is still a limited miniseries. Well, I guess 12 episodes, not mini. It's a limited series on a direct-to-stream platform. There's no box office. It can be the biggest show in the world. A year from now, it won't matter, right? In the public conscious, it's not Harry Potter. There are not 12 years of films being made. You know what I mean? But in the game is still the priority. At the end of the day, the game will have generated way more revenue than the subscriptions HBO will get off this show will have generated. Last of Us Part 3 is going to be more important than anything that has to do with this show. If anything, it's like the game comes out, and then a year later, you get the uptick in sales again when the show comes out. Selling a quality video game is much more important to the people making money than the show being good for 12 episodes for 12 weeks. That being said, Chris, I said this to you the other day. I'm really excited to see this team do Last of Us Part 2 because, as again we've chronicled well, I thought Last of Us Part 2 was a much better game in almost every way than Part 1, which you would expect after 7 years. But story-wise, I really disagreed with how they told the story. And I didn't have a problem with Joel being killed. I didn't have a problem with like doing something to make us care about Abby and her friends, even though she killed this other guy that we really, really love. I didn't have a problem with like it being a love story between Ellie and her girlfriend. I can't remember what her name was. You know, all these other problems people had because they're fucking stupid. I only had a problem with how they wove all those narrative elements together. I think for me, it completely backfired in making me care about certain characters. So if they go back and they tell that story, they are not going to tell it the same way. You know, they're going to tell it like a conventional television show.
Yeah, they could so easily just do an A-B storyline, and you can't do that in a video game where you're controlling 2 different characters.
I don't know.
You cannot tell me that you think that there's going to be 2/3 of a season where it's following one character, and then 1/3 of a season whiplashing you into a character you don't give a shit about / hate, and then going into another season where you start the third, and then so you're not going to do 1 season Ellie, 1 season Abby. It'd be like 2/3 and then 1/3, then 1/3 and 2/3, because you go back to being Ellie as the final conclusion, like the post.
That's a lot of thirds. I don't know. That adds like 2 1/3 to me, so I don't get the fucking math there. But I teach theater, so
2/3, 1/3, 1/3, 2/3.
Yeah, that's still 2. Still don't get it. As it pertains to like one full
2
season.
seasons.
Anyway,
2 seasons for part 2.
Yeah,
they're not going to do 2 seasons for part 2.
Yes, they will.
They are not. They have said they are not.
Yeah, nope. They certainly will. They will do 2 seasons
Side bet?
of part
Do I
2.
smell
That's
a
a
side bet?
crazy take. Side bet right now.
That game is like 50 hours long. How do you fit that into 1 season of TV?
It's literally like you could do like an episode per day, have it be like an hour and 20 minutes, and each of the
They would
episodes.
have to do a 24 episode season in order to fit that into 1 season of television.
Not real time. Like each day is 1 hour of television because it's a 3-day arc, maybe an 18 episode season, but it's not going to be 2 seasons. They're not spreading it across 2 seasons.
You're thinking like an artist right now. You're thinking like an artist. They'll milk the fuck out of it
I'm thinking like what the literal showrunner said.
Yeah, Neil Druckmann also said there would never be a Last of Us Part 2 because Joel and Ellie's story was over.
Not Neil Druckmann.
You can't trust what an artist says. It's not up to him. It's not up to him.
He's a Zionist anyway. Like the whole Last of Us Part 2 is super fucking problematic in its Israeli-Palestinian connotations. Like we haven't even gone there. Like Neil Druckmann himself, fuck him. Who fucking cares about him?
That's above my pay
I
grade.
trust Craig. I trust Craig.
Craig is not the one who's greenlighting seasons 2 and 3 of the Last of Us TV show coming to you on HBO Max in the year 2025 and 2026.
I'm just saying, I'm excited to see The Last of Us Part 2 done justice because there were serious flaws in that narrative and the way it was structured. And I've made this joke before, but it's true. Like, yeah, you're not going to give me 8 episodes where you see the entire story unfold. Ellie wastes all of Abby's fucking friends, and then they restart the show. You know what I mean? Like that is insane to even think about in a TV show. And that's basically what the game did. And it whatever reasons they had, it didn't work for me or for a lot of other players. So just seeing that story told conventionally, the way that it was conceived.
I think, yeah, you could definitely grow a lot more attention and make people care about these opposing factions a lot easier if you do like an A-B, even if it was just episode to episode, like you do an episode that's just primarily Ellie, an episode that's primarily Abby. I think that would assuage a lot of the problems that EJ had with it. And I don't think you fit that into one season of TV just based on the amount of content is in the second game. And
the first game, yeah, it's 10 hours of cutscenes, basically. 9 hours of cutscenes, and they're making a 12-hour movie, basically, out of it. Last of Us Part 2 has about twice as many cutscenes. There's a lot more content. So maybe, 18 episodes, Chris, I'd be happy.
They would have to cut so much.
Well,
and I don't think Neil would be too precious about that. And I think Sony would be happier with doing 2 more episodes.
They would, yes, certainly HBO and Sony would be glad to do that.
I don't see how you carry interest over, like, where are you going to split that? If you're going to tell it conventionally, as you're describing it, which I still disagree is the right way to go, how are you going to create tension in that going from one season to the other? Like, where do you cut that off in the middle? There's no good point to do that. Like, if you're going to break that into 2 seasons, you should absolutely do Abby's season, break it.
I never want to hear Abby's season ever again. No character seasons. That is not how we're telling the story the second time around. We've done it once. Let's not do it again.
And it fucking worked. Just because you didn't like it doesn't mean it didn't work. It fucking worked.
Are
it was a great twist.
Overwhelming minority. There's no twists because you see it.
Oh, along with every critic who reviewed this game, yeah, I'm in the minority. It was a fucking game of the year in 2020. Come on.
You're in the minority of saying that worked. Every review you read has the same criticisms of the game, and rightfully so. It didn't ruin the game.
And still gives it like a mid-90s or a low 90s? Like, absolutely not. It could not have affected them to the degree it affected you.
Skyrim got 10s out of 10s upon release, and it is quite literally, statistically, the most broken game maybe ever released. Like, just because it got a 9 out of 10.
That's not comparable.
Yeah, just because it got a 9 out of 10 does not mean there weren't criticisms of it, and that they were all pretty similar. Like, people had beef with that. Sorry, I should say real commentators had real beef with that game that had nothing to do with Joel's character or gay people or Neil Druckmann. They had real criticisms of the game, and rightfully so. It didn't ruin the experience, and it helped that the game was much better than the first one.
It's a fantastic game.
EJ, if we are just going based more on, well, less chronologically based on game time, but more just like the events in which they happen and how that would translate into a TV show, would the death of Joel be a good season 2 ender? If you were doing like Abby, here's Abby, this new character that we haven't seen before. We're doing flashbacks to like establish her character. We're getting the slow moments of Ellie and Joel at the new camp that they're at, like the city that they're living in. You get her relationship building with her girlfriend, and you have this like smooth translation into both these characters and how they're growing and how they, obviously Abby has this revenge story and you know it's for Joel, but you see her, like, does that work in that context, having like an A-B sort of solution to that?
Joel's death is an episode 3 thing, no matter how you split it. It's just a matter of, like, again, it needs to be an A-B thing where we are seeing both factions simultaneously. and interweaving their interactions. Because in the game, there was no mystery. You knew what was happening and who was who. Like, again, I make the joke, like, I literally go through and I waste all of these fucking people. I know their names. I know their faces. I fucking shoot them in the goddamn faces. And then immediately we switch over to their point of view and I'm like playing as those characters. And like that just didn't hit for me the way they thought it would. But if you see 8 episodes of A, B, and you're tying in this sort of mystery of how these people's stories are interweaving, I don't know, there'll have to be changes to some degree, but Joel being killed early on, like, unless you just write a whole new show for fucking 8 episodes, like, it happens so early, and it is the catalyst for all of the other game's events. And even though there are flashbacks and there's some contextualization for Joel and Ellie's relationship, it really is just the revenge story. And so without fundamentally changing a lot of what that game did, I just don't see how they could do that. But this show is a massive hit. Pedro Pascal, like, I'm sorry, but nothing I've seen out of Bella Ramsey at 19 years old in anything she's done tells me she will be able to carry a show the way Ashley Johnson carried that game.
With her voice.
And, well, her performance. I mean, she is that character.
Yeah, but she'll never be that character in real life anymore. She's like 35.
She'll be that character in The Last of Us Part 3.
Yeah, right. No, Bella Ramsey's not carrying the show given her current ability.
What does that even mean? We haven't seen anything from. She hasn't had any material
we haven't
yet.
had proof.
Exactly. That I'm like, nothing's fucking happened. These people haven't developed yet. It's episode 2.
I've seen her in several things.
Through 2 episodes.
Great. I'm just saying, unless a lot happens, unless she gets a lot better at acting in the next couple of episodes.
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more of her range and her ability to carry, because I'm pretty sure they're going to be doing Left Behind stuff.
And the winter season, like, where she's out there dealing with, and did I read that? No. Yeah. Is Nolan North playing the cannibal?
I can't, there's no way, right? No one gives a shit about Nolan North.
Well, no, but no one gives a shit
Visually.
about that character.
He's a handsome guy.
Like, I mean, he's a great
fine.
character, but I mean,
He's
like,
fine.
it's just going to be like
Put
Joe
Willem Dafoe in
Schmo.
that role and everyone loves it more.
Well, yeah, I mean, that guy's goated.
My whole point was just that as much as you want to trust the artist, Chris, studio meddling, no matter how successful, is a factor. And to lose Pedro Pascal because you're going to tell a 1-for-1 adaptation of Last of Us Part 2, there was not a lot of Joel in that game, even with the flashbacks. There are just 20 hours without Joel in that game, in a 24-hour game. The studio is really not going to want to... Even if Bella Ramsey turns out to be the fucking second coming of Christ in the next couple episodes, to lose Pedro Pascal and what he brings, not only to the show and how people perceive him and relate to him, but just from like a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, Glenn in The Walking Dead, bringing up a point you mentioned earlier.
They'd be hard pressed to do that. So no matter how you split it, Last of Us Part 2 season 2 parts A and B it'll be pretty drastically changed and based on what we've seen in 2 episodes, for the better. But listen, we're gonna do this hopefully every week, because I watch these episodes and I immediately just like want to fucking talk about it, because there's just so much to soak up, and I have really enjoyed it so far. And I've enjoyed this conversation, even though it's been long. This has been my favorite podcast we've done in a long time. The last couple,
A lot longer than I thought.
couple have been bangers, honestly. I had a lot of fun the last couple ones we did.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, true.
Any parting thoughts, Chris?
No, I think that the treatment of season 2 is going to be like the question, because I do think they have some big things to address. I do think like they're not going to milk Joel's death. He's dead episode 2. I think we get one episode of here's our status quo and a storm is coming, where we see Abby for the first time, and we get episode 2, which is the snowstorm and Joel and Tommy and Ellie in the house, and Joel's dead, and that's it. And I think we end literally could like tell you exactly like the shot they end on, literally, of just like Ellie on the floor, just pushing in on her with her face, just getting like spattered with blood, and the sound like going to like the ear ringing, and then we're out. That's the end of episode 2. Like I could see it in my fucking head already.
If they did split it,
That could be the end of episode 1.
If they split it into 2 seasons, Nick, And to answer your earlier question a little differently, like I really could see them expanding on the world and those characters and just writing their own episodes.
Yeah. I mean, they're not beholden to the game. I mean, Neil can add whatever he wants. I mean, this is his world and they're playing in it. So, I mean, if they want to expand it and like thicken it up and like not in a way that feels like padding, but feels like enriching the story and the characters, then like by all means, you know, keep feeding us a good show. But I don't know. Obviously, I'm not invested in the games, and I'm sorry for whipping us on this tangent. Like, we came into this recording wanting to talk about these 2 episodes of television, and now we're talking about future seasons that are not confirmed.
Great, though.
That's the great... exactly. That's the great thing is, like, this show is already a bona fide fucking banger. Like, it's done. Season 1 has changed the game already.
It's a foregone conclusion, which is funny. They're not going
to fuck it up. It's over. We just get to take this ride and be like, God damn it, what a time to be alive. But how they handle season 2 is going to be a big fucking question. So I'm glad we're talking about. I'm glad we have the privilege, the right to not sit here and like hem and haw and gnash our teeth and go.
Yeah, the confidence.
Is this going to turn out? Oh, I think it's going to turn out. Oh, but they're kind of fucking this thing up. They're not fucking anything up. The show is great. Like, the show is terrific. And it'd be criminal if before we like sign off here, we didn't acknowledge like the work that Anna Torv did in her 2-episode turn as Tess is fucking unbelievable. And that was contrary to a lot of the smooth brain takes on the internet. That is a one-dimensional character in the video game that she is toughy, tough. I'm tough. I'm hardened. I'm so tough. And then she's dead. And that's her whole function of the game is to die so that Ellie can be the partner character that Joel runs around with. In this show, like, that was a whole ass human being with really rich, like complex inner life going on. And like some people really had problems with some of the changes that like, oh, you don't go after that smuggler guy, that crime guy who like wronged you and she doesn't get to kill him. I'm like,
they definitely went after him. They were just already dead when they got there.
No, yeah. Turning her character into like a reflection of Joel and how he's changed in this hellscape future where they are not in love. Like, they are just there for each other because they need each other. And it is not pragmatic. It is the only thing they have. And I think that their chemistry together really sold Joel as this like hardened shell of a man who does not have really anything to live for except for like this weird tangential hope of like meeting up with his brother. Like, that is his goal, is to meet Tommy and to like help him. He thinks he might be in trouble. And like, that is the only thing he has. Like, that's the only connection to his past that he has anymore. And it's like not even real. It's a ringing on this weird Morse code man's like radio.
I can't wait for Sunday.
Me neither. That's like, I haven't had like a weekly TV show since Andor got done that I'm just like, God damn, it's Wednesday. Like, I get to see what the hell they have cooked up for me next. And boy, I mean, they're going to be covering a lot of ground every episode. So we're going to have like a thrill a minute. I can't wait. I can't fucking wait. I can't
get some Nick Offerman on Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
I'm down for that.
Next week, hopefully we'll do this again Monday or Tuesday. We'll break down the old whammy league that we just drafted before this episode. Now that we've pontificated, about the future of this franchise, despite only 2 episodes having been released, the next recap will be a lot shorter. Not that this was a recap, but you know what I mean. Reaction, impressions, discussion.
General thoughts. We'll probably be a little more focused since we've already hashed out a bunch of our sort of knee-jerk reactions of like jumping into an adaptation for the first time, especially with you two having experienced both the games so intimately.
Yeah.
It'll be quicker.
I'm looking forward to it. I hope they can keep them coming at the pace that they have been. It's always a bummer when you get like that 38-minute episode. Like episode 4, and you're like, fuck, man, why is it so short? I gotta wait another week for this shit? So, anyway, Console Crusade.
Podcast.
That's how you end the podcast right there.